And and we are live. Welcome to episode 12 of the Qué Pasó podcast. With any luck, Ozzy will be joining us later on in the stream to contribute to this discussion. We are today discussing a very important topic, the struggle for democracy in the Americas. I'm joined, of course, by my usual co-host, Eduardo. Eduardo, how's it going?
Fine. How are you doing, Ernest?
I'm pretty good, thank you very much. And we have a special guest, another one who helped bring forth our podcast, Manuel. Manuel, how are you?
I'm more or less, thanks. I have an issue, a health issue that when I don't want to bother the public with that, but I'm fine to speak. So that's all that.
And look who it is, Ozzy himself.
What up,
Welcome.
my man?
Not much. Finally, we are covered from coast to coast of the Americas.
Yes.
From pole to
So-
pole.
Yeah.
All of Okay, so what are we talking about?
We are going over the struggle with establishing stable democracy in the Americas. Something that, I think, honestly, every single country in Latin America has struggled with. It's almost like it's impossible to have anything long term. Even Chile, which is now considered to be rather stable, is only. Democracy is only once again new to your country, Ozzy.
Yeah, it was. You see now, after we came back from the democracy, after the referendum of the yes and no, the other one of the story. I think that compared to other countries in the region, Chile has yet to meet its own far right movement that threatens to take over control of our institutions, our way of life. I mean, we have groups, and we have a guy, but the problem with these guys is that everyone hates them. No one wants them in power. We have this guy called José Antonio Cast. Now, to give you a brief description of him, he is a far right politician. He is extremely Catholic. He's extremely Look, he hasn't said negative things like I wouldn't love my son if he was gay, like Bolsonaro has, but he has said that he doesn't really care a lot about the LGBT community in general. Now some people say, "Oh, he's gonna kill us." No, he's not. He's not. I mean, he's not a good person, but he's not like an evil monster like other characters I've seen. And I think the reason why here in Chile is better, I think it has to do because we're not hueones like the rest of us, like the rest of the Latin America. I mean, that's the only. Yes.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that based on the experience with Augusto Pinochet, Chilenos are the Chileans are a little bit more reluctant to follow that kind of path, whereas certain countries have different experiences with the rise of dictators, both military and, in the case of Peru, of course, Peru is very unique, where a democratically elected president overthrew the government.
That's why you never trust us.
But I mean, it's funny because Peru is weird in many respects. I mean, they've had a left-wing military dictator in the 70s, Juan Velasquez, and after him it was democracy for about, give or take, 10, 20 years. Well, I shouldn't say after Velasquez, because there was one other president after him who was a military officer, Bermudez, and then he quit. Now he's in prison in Italy for some stuff he did, Operation Condor.
Yes.
Yeah, and then it became Bella Lunteri, and then it was Alan Garcia, And after him, it was Alberto Fujimori, who, as we all know, overthrew the government and ruled as a caudillo for about a decade, and is back in prison again.
Again.
Yeah. And I mean, even oh, sorry,
No, don't worry. Sorry. Continue. What were you saying?
I was just going to say, I mean, the only state I think in the Americas. I mean, we even have Emmanuel, who is from Nicaragua, and
Manuel.
they've had the
What?
experience with a dynasty, the Somosas,
And Sandinistas.
Yes.
Oh
and the
yes.
Sandinistas. And of course, Eduardo, who comes from what Mario Vargas Llosa called the most perfect dictatorship.
Oh yeah. But
And
I would like to say that before we go full on the strolls, we should settle some like how you say, like a background for where did the alleged well, the democracies and the some of them alleged democracies came to be in America.
definitely.
Like as everyone knows, every country in America is product of colonization from European powers, mainly Spain, also Portugal,
Mhm.
England, and France.
Yeah.
Eventually, every country through through force or or through diplomacy won their independence. So and some became actually mm, democratic countries with no more with from the start, from the get go, like the United States, Colombia. Well, in that time, the Gran Colombia, and Canada. Some others started as monarchies, as Mexico or Brazil, and for example, Pablo, the Chile when it was founded as a country, was it founded as a democratic republic?
I mean, after we became we became actually independent from the Spaniards. We were a democracy, but it was like very strange because we had what was called like the Director Supremo, which was basically a president, but he had like more like a military authoritarian power rather than a president. Let me see here, independence.
Wasn't Bernardo O'Higgins the first Supreme Director?
Yes, he was the first. Some say that he was like the first president, but he wasn't. He was like the supreme director of Chile, which is something pretty different. But let me see.
Like the equivalent of Stalin in Russia in the Soviet
Yes.
Union, the
I
Supreme Secretary of the Communist Party, more or
I
less.
Yes.
yeah.
Yes,
But I mean, like even Honduras and Nicaragua and the rest there. I mean, after breaking away from Mexico, they formed a what was it? The United States of Central America,
Exactly, and the Federación de Estados Unidos de Centroamérica. The,
and that didn't last very long.
no, about
it
17
usually
years,
doesn't.
1838, it disbanded.
But it was like reunited at the end of the 18th and 19th century, right?
No,
No?
not at all.
Oh.
Every went the wrong way. I mean, the so-called Central American integration has tried to include Panama, which was part of the Great Colombia, but that integration is just for symbolic purposes and cooperation and all that, but no attempts to reform the federation have been done since 1838.
Okay. Yeah, and well, it's a constant. If you ask me for in Latin America, a collection of every country had been governed by what will be called strongmen, caudillos,
Yes.
like yes,
Because always it was the like the how to say this, the soldiers are the one who had the power. They have the guns. They are the ones who
exactly.
defend the country. So they are also they because in general Latin America has always been ruled by landowners, and most landowners have been part of the military. So that's the reason why I have power. And I think that's also like the historical reason why here in Latin America you are it's not very rare to see military dictatorships.
Yeah,
But you know I think that I think if I have to mention I think the biggest problem now Latin American democracy faces now currently is how partisan politics have become in the last few years. Like I mean we're seeing this in the US, but now I'm starting to see this here in in my uni, for example. My classmates have a very like rigid set of views, and they keep that set of views independently of the event that is going on. I mean, for example, recently we had this case of a policeman. Here we call them carabineros. He was attacked by encapuchados, so the hooded figures, like the ones from like we were seeing Antifa dudes. They were dressed in a similar fashion, but they weren't Antifa.
yeah,
And they started tagging him while he was on the ground. He was unconscious because of the kicks he received. He was kicked again, and pretty much everyone I know condemned the incident. Look, I mean, honestly, even honestly, I really hated the way my classmates saw it because my classmates said it was okay, it was justified because in their mind, a carabinero, as they say, is like this some kind of fascist authority. They every time carabineros doing their job, even if it is the most basic of procedures, they say, "Oh, they're repressing us, just like in the dictatorship." No, you're not.
The whole fuck the
And
police thing.
yeah, oh fuck the police. I mean, but you see, if the police here was randomly shooting some people because I don't know they look suspicious and in the end they weren't suspicious and they were going somewhere else, I don't know, or even by the color of their skin, I will actually take part and say yes, we should hold these policemen accountable. But no, what we're seeing now today, and is this going on in our own school system, we have kids who are being told since they're young to hate the police force, to say because there's a derogatory term which is Paco Culiao, basically. It's like saying you fucking cop. And here in Chile recently there was a law that it made it illegal to say. I mean, they say that he made it illegal to criticize the institution. That's what many leftists say, but in reality, what it was is that it was illegal to say throw slurs or nasty comments at individual policemen, not at the institution.
But now,
So,
oh, sorry.
mhm. No, keep going. See, I
I
already
I
finished.
I was just gonna ask, like, are people like still apprehend, like, did they mistrust the police in Chile, like the Cabaneros, because of their association with the former regime? Is that a big reason why, or do you think this has always been an issue? Because I mean, I know that a lot of people, especially when you look at like different places in Latin America and even in Spain, they viewed like the Carboneros and the Guardia Civil in say for in Peru, which is now the PNP. They viewed them as an apparatus of the landowners of, and so
I get where you're
they
going.
I'm sorry.
I get where you're going. So I think mostly it has to do with that. I think it has to do with the the fact that carabineros form part of the military junta. For those of people who don't know, the military junta back then was commander of the army, the general of the air force, the admiral of the navy, and the jefe general of carabineros. The main for because carabineros is considered as a part of the armed forces, and I think it has to do with that. But I think it's just that is one huge part of of what is going on. But considering that I think it gets to a point in which you start wondering if these people, the ones who attack the police force, they realize that these are people who put their lives at risk to keep them safe. Because this is a pattern you will always see. There is a case about some idiot who kills someone, and they're always complaining why carabineros never apprehended him. Now, when carabineros are apprehending someone, they start complaining, saying they're using excessive force. This is like during the dictatorship, and blah 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 blah. And
Uh,
I think that mistrusting your institutions, like your authority, political institutions, I don't think it's a problem of democracy, but I think that we should realize that it's something to do with how bipartisan politics are becoming in Latin America. The fact that now that if you're not okay with my side of the story, that means that you're from the other side. For example, if you're oh so you're so you don't believe that carabineros are fachos. Oh, so you must be a facho too. It's in that way. It's every time I talk with someone, and some of my classmates who actually are actually no actually uh don't but buy this all this fed up bullshit. They say the problem is not that look, the problem is that they're throwing all of carabineros into one giant bag and saying no, all of the institution works for the interests of the wealthy and the political class. And I on one hand have to agree on some aspects they say, but really, I mean, most carabineros actually are people who came from very poor areas, and they just want to keep people safe.
Yes. Now, I'll actually extend the same question to Manuel and to Eduardo. Like, do the citizens of your respective countries also see? Like, I know, like Mexico has like the rurales and the federales, but do the regular person generally see these these police forces as like an arm of I'm gonna say a socialist term here, like the bourgeoisie.
oh, totally. I mean, the police here and the military has really bad reputation because, well, you know what they are trying to do. I mean, they are not trying to uh, tell like pat your shoulder and tell you, please stop doing that. No. The army, if confronted with violence, is gonna use violence. Even the police too, and of course we still are whining about the events of 1968, the massacre of Tlatelolco.
Oh yes, I was in the same plaza when I went to Mexico.
Yeah, the Plaza of las Tres Culturas.
Yes, I was there.
Yeah, it's well, it's a complicated issue there. The Tlatelolco massacre. I mean, apparently there were communist terrorist cells among the students.
Oh
Uh,
really?
yeah, there
Like
are
Antifa types or like
no serious like uh,
oh
people go, communist terrorists, for to be more specific. Like, I mean, it was the Cold War, and it
of
was going to
course.
be the Olympics there in that year in Mexico City. It was going to begin 10 days from the from that day. So imagine in the moment of in the moment all the eyes of the world were in Mexico. I think for for the communist world will be like the perfect moment to commit terrorism acts in the most in the neighbor of his most hated rival. Just imagine that.
Wow.
I think many people say that it's conspiracy, but I think they were there. And something that is not really really clear about the events of the of that night is who fired the first shot.
Yeah, it's definitely, that's a defining issue. But I think we're getting a little off the topic there.
Oh well, just let Manuel tell us about the
Yes,
reputation of
yes.
the security forces in his country.
Before I intervene, I'll ask, where did Ozymandias go?
I might have had just a technical issue there. He should be back shortly.
All right. Well, to begin, I'll say that I see a pattern. After the testimony of our Chilean and Mexican friends, uh, of seeing the police, the attacks against the police, intellectual attacks, uh, from a polarized country. All right, the polarization issue, but the right being dominant, I think, because the accusations happen to be in the order of excessive force, discrimination against minorities, uh, favoring the wealthy. I mean, they're all issues that resonate with the left, with the socialists, and so I think the socialists feel they come from the underdog position, right? I don't know if I'm being understood.
Yes.
And
Yep.
but here in my country, uh, it's the total opposite. The police force is the right arm of the dictator, and they have no credibility whatsoever. The few good apples they had uh, started fleeing the police force. So all they have now is the the minions of the dictatorship, the savage ones, the, the guys with no empathy. So the institution is completely uh, decimated as a police force. It's now a private army for the Ortega regime.
Yeah.
It's completely different here, and I mean, I'll just throw in my perspective on the police and that here, just for, um, I guess, just for comparison. Um, we don't have that same image of our police because the main police you think about here is the Mounties, or as we call them, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. We don't. They've never really had that image as an arm of the landowning class or anything like that.
I mean,
Now,
something happens in Canada.
well, we never. The last time the police, I believe, got directly involved in some sort of uprising. Well, there was two. There was the Red River Rebellion in the 1800s, and that was a an indigenous uprising. That
Wow.
yeah, it was the Northwest Mounted Police was what they were called before, and they and the militia had to come in to suppress a group called the Métis, which are essentially mestizos. I mean, if we want to use the Latin comparison, they were mestizos, and it was led by a fellow called Louis Riel, who I guess was kind of like Tupac Amaru,
Okay.
In that kind of sense. Like he tried to fight for his people, and we let him do it twice. He kind of caused trouble twice, and the last time they caught him and hanged him. But I mean, that was really the last time the police direct. Well, I mean, now give or take a few strikes and things like that, labor strikes. But I mean, the last time that the police were really used to suppress a rebellion of any serious threat. So we really don't have that history of police brutality, and mostly it's because Canada, unlike South America, has a long and stable history of democratic rule. I mean, since
Also,
18
Canadians like black people.
uh, g- general, yes, they do. We like
Hmm.
everybody. Um, so with that though, I mean, we have democracy instilled in us because unlike Latin America, where you guys had to fight for your independence. The British just gave us ours when we went after we negotiated with them. I mean, my province, my island was independent. We had responsible government, which was essentially um, we were a we were independent, but we weren't. You know what I'm trying to say. Um,
Yes.
we handled local affairs and and um, anything like foreign affairs and things like that were the responsibility of the United Kingdom. So with that, we grew as a society in democracy. Now, was it perfect? Absolutely not. There were restrictions on landowning and that, like who could vote. It so
Okay.
you had to own a certain amount of land. You had to be a white male. Um, it was a few. There was a few requirements, but I mean, we evolved,
Hmm.
and I
I
mean,
fully
I
get
don't.
it. I mean,
And
you come from a country that has never had like we have like a military takeover, or and I think that that's in part the reason why why the right wing here at least. Oh, see, I and watch the race choose. Oh, okay. So sorry.
no, no,
You
no,
know, no,
Yeah.
no. Say something because I was about to say something, but I kind of lost it. So I think
no. But
I'm going to remember later. But say.
now I'll say this right quick. I think that the main problem with democracy in the Americas, I mean, it comes down to when. I mean, it generally all comes back to Bolivar. At least in the Americas. I mean, Mexico has different characters. Of course, you have Agustina Turbe, and I think I said that correct.
Iturbide.
Iturbide.
Iturbide and characters like him. Um, and well, they're not really the best examples of democracy because they created the Mexican Empire, the first one. Um, but Bolivar's like Gran Colombia was a failure because it was it never had the chance to really instill that democratic spirit and idea.
Bolivar tried to actually to uh, tumble Iturbide from power here in Mexico and made and change the system to a democratic one.
He really wasn't very good at installing democratic governments because he got kicked out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
From and then Gran Colombia collapsed. Um, but I mean, what really causes things like that? Like, why? I'll ask this, guys. Why, in your opinion, is democracy so difficult to have to be stable in South America? I mean, is it education of the people? Is it special interest groups? I mean, I know that say the Central America, like Nicaragua, for example, had experiences with the United Fruit Company. and
Oh yes, yes.
they were essentially the power behind the throne, as it were. You took your orders from the UFC.
Yeah, even until today, there is an issue with those plantation companies with the excessive use of toxic um, toxic chemicals to fight plagues, uh, and there at least there was an ongoing fight, judicial fight with one of those chemicals, with one of those companies, and we're talking even into 21st century here. So, but I think the problem is, from my perspective, like Eduardo said, a tradition of military, and one side uh, take rises up in arms against another, and a few decades later, the other side comes back and and takes over from the first one, and etc.
Yeah.
It goes on and on. And on the contrary, Canada, for example, the United States, they kind of expanded by acquiring land, by purchasing land. And so I see a pattern there. I mean, like you buy your money, so to speak.
We
Don't you
we
agree with me?
I do agree with you to an extent. Now, I mean, the United States didn't always purchase land, as Eduardo
Yeah,
is well
Texas.
aware of, and
I
well,
know.
And California, um, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, due to manifest destiny, which I think also contributed to some of the problems of the Americas, and as well as American foreign policy, because the United States through the 1900s really didn't care um, if your countries were free and democratic. They just
Yes.
wanted dictators or whoever was in charge to follow their interests, and that's why you had, say, in Cuba, you had Florencio Batista, you had Duvalier in Haiti, you had
Oh,
what was
Papa
it?
Doc.
And what was his name in? Well, I know Haiti is not exactly Latin
Trujillo
America.
in Dominicana.
Trujillo, yeah, you had Trujillo, of course, a very good puppet of the Americans.
El Chivo.
Um, yep, and I mean, you had Somosas in Nicaragua. You have a long history of these people, and
If I
the
may,
United. Yep, sure.
if I may, these takeovers that we're talking about, usually one side was the U.S. backed side, and the other was the nationalist side or the communist side, and that has been going on for more than a century now.
Yes, and for example, this interventionism from, for example, the United States in other countries. I mean, with the manifest destiny uh, issue, there in that time they weren't the only ones that believe in this manifest destiny. I mean, when El Salvador break away from Mexico after the fall of the empire, they sent emissaries to Washington to be admitted into the Union.
Hmm.
Really?
Yep, they did, but they said like, "Huh, you're too far, and um, you're too far." Like they literally had to. And if you remember, there wasn't a Panama Canal in those days, so a ship going from El Salvador to Washington or to Florida or some place in the United States will take ages to reach the place. And well,
I didn't know that detail about our neighbors in El Salvador.
it was like a really quick experiment, and not every people in El Salvador was really convinced. Like it's like it was mostly like idealistic people, like, oh, they have a democracy, we want to be a democracy too, and well, didn't
But I
work at
mean,
the end.
there's also other things that kind of interrupted. Besides, well, it all comes down to America in terms of the interruption. Like, I mean, you look at a former president of Nicaragua, Senor William Walker,
Yeah.
um, another incredibly undemocratic individual who seized power. Um, there's always been a history of intervention, especially by Americans, in these affairs. Say, for example, even recently in Chile. I mean, Chile, when Salvador Allende became president,
Yep.
um, the Americans backed the military junta. The Americans said, "You go ahead and do this. We're not going to intervene."
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, the
They,
Americans
they,
even. Oh, sorry.
yes, you see, there's a museum here called the Museo de la Memoria, which it talks about the victims of the military junta, how the military junta came to power, and there are a ton of the classified documents in the museum that you can read actually. And when you start reading them, you see that they start to explain that if Allende consolidates his regime in Chile, we could have a second Cuba, and and it was a particularly in that time it was strategically to avoid the so-called domino effect. So the CIA actually there was there is there more like a myth that the CIA were the ones who supported the military dictatorship. It wasn't like CIA agents like paved the ground for it. No, no, no. What it was that the CIA held a number of meetings with high-ranking officers of the army, Pinochet, and they said, "Okay, we're fully okay with this. You can do it, and once you do it, we will recognize you immediately." And what happened later was, well, it was el 11 de septiembre de 1973. What happened was that the Navy and the military started occupying certain cities and port docks in Chile, and the idea was to say to Allende, where basically he was to be surrendered. In fact, there was actually a car that he was expected to go to I think it was an embassy of Switzerland to ask for political asylum, but he said he didn't. He said I'm going to end up my term like any president would. So then the story goes that the Moneda was bombed by two Hawker Hunter planes, and then tanks and soldiers stormed the building. Um, the Allende had a group that was the grupo de personal de amigos, a group of personal friends, which despite they fought to the last man to defend him, they failed and he died. And then Pinochet assumed power. And as I remember, it actually sent shockwaves, at least in Argentina. Pero in fact, Juan Domingo Perón, he actually condemned it as a fatality for the continent. And
Mm, yeah, continue, continue.
look, overall, I say that, well, we still have politicians here in Chile actually who say that no, what happened back then was okay, it was justified, and I say okay, but it was justified. Why? Well, because Chile is now a better country right now. But I say, but that justifies the death of at least 3,000 people.
I wanted to say, and that not to sound like those Pinochet loving old writers from the U.S. All right,
Hmm.
but a second Cuba and being Chile, that's a scary thought because the original Cuba, as depleted as it stood after the fall of the Red Curtain, they have been financing the the socialist repression in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and who knows where else. I mean, they could be in Bolivia, for all we know, in case Evo falls as well, or Evo is being tried uh, to be put to rights, as we are here in Nicaragua and Venezuela. And I, as I say, like I say, uh, Chile as a second Cuba is a scary thought. But that's not to say that Ozymandias is wrong. I mean,
Hmm.
to prevent uh, like some sort of communist superpower in Latin America, is any method uh, justifiable? No, I don't think so, and it shouldn't be.
I mean, of course, it was. I mean, I'm okay with what you say, but I mean, look, I've been called a facho before here in Chile, even though I hate the military dictatorship. I hate what it stands for. I hate how it came to power. I hate the people who suffer through it. I mean, my parents had a tough time during it, and when you start thinking that people have grown up without their parents or their uncles or their mothers, and you start and I'm seeing people in the street saying, no, 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 it was okay because they were just commies. I think, if I remember correctly, I think it was Sargon of Akkad who he was in. I think he was in this Week in Stupid. I don't know that he was talking about Pinochet and say, oh, he killed like 3,000, like not that many people. That were 3,000 commies. And I'm just thinking, wait, there weren't 3,000 commies. There were 3,000 people. Even worse, most of those people weren't even affiliated with the Communist Party. There were people who they found on the streets, and they incriminate them, saying, "Oh, no, no, that is a commie."
There's a lot of simplistic arguments being thrown around from both sides, left and right, of the debate.
Mm.
I agree, but now like I just posed a question earlier. I mean, with these dictatorships and that, like the way some of them come to power and maintain it. I mean, from Allende, not from Allende, from Pinochet to Fujimori and Juan Velasquez to Maduro, to Ortega, and even to, once again, I gotta say it because I do love Mario Vargas Llosa, the most perfect of dictatorships. Um, and does it come down to education? Is the education of the general population, does that play an important role in these in the maintenance of power for these dictatorships? I mean, because you know the people, they either just don't care or they don't have the education to recognize the negative effects.
I think it plays
I
it plays also a factor. Um, I mean, we shouldn't go to a place and call them uneducated, like like that guy from EA did with the Battlefield 5 thing. But we should say that the biggest problem is that people now currently they don't care about complex campaign manifestos. They want three or two things. I mean, the thing we saw, for example, I would use Bolsonaro as an example. What Bolsonaro was proposing, he wanted to reduce the age of I think it was the criminal age. I mean, he wanted to reduce the age in which a criminal can be judged to like 16, because they have a problem with 16 gangbangers. He wanted to strengthen the economy. He wants to improve Brazil's infrastructure. I mean, he's offering things that are basic to the average Brazilian, and I think that's the problem we have now, because now people just want two or three things. We saw it in with Brexit. People didn't care about a ton of stuff like how is going to affect Britain economically. No, they wanted to have control back of their country. That was the only thing they wanted. With Donald Trump, it was the same. What they wanted lowering taxes. They wanted to keep immigration at a certain point. They wanted to bring he wanted to bring back jobs. I mean, that was the basic thing. It wasn't that people just it was the people. Oh no, we hate this. We hate Mexicans and stuff. No, they wanted two or three things, and that's what is going on also in South America. The problem is, I don't think that we should say people are uneducated. I think we should say is that people's needs are quite specific, and the problem is that some politicians are not adapting to the needs of the people.
Yeah, and well, that's a couple of issues there that you are touching that I think it's one of the most challenges to democracy in the Americas, which is I would like to summarize it in a quote I think from Winston Churchill. The best argument against democracy is talking with a voter for 5 minutes, and that's true. I mean, and
Yes.
and you're telling it. Many people in every democracy is the immense majority is a single voter, a single issue voter.
Yep.
People,
Hmm.
yeah, like a small business owner in the United States when Trump came to power, maybe they voted for him because they wanted, as you say, the lower taxes, cutting the red tape and stuff. Religious people wanted him to make a stand against abortion and same-sex marriage,
Hmm.
and people in the some people that has been victim of um, migrant crime. They maybe they wanted some some relief on migrant policies. Also, yep.
I, I, as a non-American, far from being an American, wanted Trump to win to curtail the progression of feminism and leftism in Latin America. That was my issue as an outsider, and that's why I wanted him to win. So, in some respects, I happen to represent the problem that Eduardo talks about, the single voting issue. I think
Hmm. I think
Um,
that's a great problem.
I think it
Yeah.
is too. As someone who has run for an elected office, I've seen it myself. Now maybe it's because I live in a democratic society that I I try to be a lot more optimistic and have more faith in the voting public. But I mean, generally, the biggest concern on a voter is I want my life to be easier. I want it to be more affordable. And I'm going to go for whoever is going to offer me this. And I also see what draws people to, the dictatorships. I mean, you look, for example, at, and I know everyone's going to kind of groan because I have to do it because it's the country that I'm most familiar with in the Americas,
Do it. We
besides
know you had a
Venezuela.
hard on for it. Do it.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, you look at Peru in the 80s. Peru was a dictatorship waiting to happen. You had hyperinflation thanks to rather bad policies of Alan Garcia. You had a rising problem with rebels in Sendero Luminoso. Um, you had the government, both chambers of government, the Congress and the upper house, arguing back and forth, unable to reach, consensus, and the country was in a very difficult situation. And then Alberto Fujimori comes along. Um,
You know.
oh, by the way, Caleb is in the chat. Hi, Caleb. Thank you
Oh, hi,
for
Caleb.
thank you.
Hope
Thank
you're
you for
okay,
watching,
man.
man.
If you ever want to
Hmm.
come on, let us know. We'll send you a link. We'd love to have you on.
Yeah.
Other than that, enjoy
Caleb is
your
cool.
water ration. Um, I'm really sad to actually have to say that.
Yeah,
No one should have a
Cable.
ration on water.
No one. Cable. If I could, we're now planning Qué Pasó helicopter division to take you out of there. And we will throw I will throw Maduro from the chopper. I promise.
But yeah, that would be wonderful if we could get rid of that facho. But
Yes.
Maduro, not Caleb. Caleb is one of my favorite Venezuelans, and
Yeah, he's cool.
Viva Venezuela Libre, by the way.
Mhm.
But I just wanted to just go on. Like, I mean, with the whole situation in Peru in the 80s, I mean, it made Alberto Fujimori's rise to power that much stronger, and when he got in, the Congress was still infighting. There was a lot of indecision, and he then implemented the autogolpe, which, I mean, most Latin Americans have heard of. I mean, generally, you have heard of Alberto Fujimori as a really unique case. I mean, a president, a democratically elected leader who overthrew the democratically elected government. And the thing about Fujimori is that what he did in the 90s is still here today. I mean, because he changed the Constitution in, I believe it was 1993 or 92. Lama, if she's there, she can confirm that. I'm pretty sure it was 93. Um, where he took the parliament, he took the Congress of Peru and changed it from a two-tier system to a unicameral system. And the way it works now is that democracy in Peru is really still messed up. It doesn't help the people as it should. The proportional representation they have is weird and makes no sense to me, because it's a mixed system. But that's a whole other kettle of churros, or kettle of fish, as we say it here. But either way, the effect on it was that he essentially crippled democracy in Peru, and even to this day, I mean, it is still very fragile. I hear so many Peruvian friends of mine who want a caudillo because they see all the corruption in the country, and I mean, that's another reason I think that contributes to the dictators, the rise of them, because people see a strong leader as the only one who can take corruption and destroy it. And it's that fallacy, that myth that gives them the power as well. And Lama confirms it was 93 when he changed the constitution, and Peru has felt it ever since. I mean, it's still a major mess, and it needs to be completely reformed, or else we're going to see another strongman. I don't know who it is. I I I wish it was Mario Vargas Llosa, because I just like him anyway. I think he'd be a lovely dictator, and at least we get a few good books out of him from that. I mean, Pantalon goes to Congress. That's as funny as I'm going to make it. But I mean, either way, I mean, the system is the way it is now. It's going to contribute to it, because people still talk about dictatorships, and they still look for that caudillo, and it is kind of scary, to hear people, being nostalgic for someone like Juan Velasquez. People miss him. People speak affectionately of Juan Velasquez, despite the fact that he was like a proto Chavez. He was what inspired Hugo Chavez,
Exactly.
and they miss him because he did some good things, yes, but he was also a dictator.
I mean,
Um,
that's something we have. I think we have a lot in Latin America. Like, uh, we for dictators, we tend to see the glass half full. Like, we only remember the good things they did. They,
With Pinochet, many people do it here. They see the glass half full.
same with Castro. Some people have very good opinions of Fidel Castro. Most of them are not Cubans, but
We have,
because like,
excuse me, we have a newfound love for the Somozas as well here because he objectively wasn't as bad as Ortega. Ortega has been the absolute worst uh, human rights violator we have had. Nothing, Somoza didn't even come close.
wow.
But I mean, it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be trying to rescue the Somoza dictatorship image just because of Ortega. We should be. We should keep a balanced view. Excuse my intervention. Continue.
Well,
No, I always enjoy your opinions, Manuel. But
I
here's yeah.
no. I think that would be kind of off topic what I wanted to say, or maybe not.
Well,
What about that myth? I mean, I call it myth, even though I kind of agree with it. The the Spanish heritage is is a part of why we are so used to corrupt government officials, contrary to
Um,
the English colonies and Canada. What do you think about that?
um, it sounds
mm,
weird because I mean, I think it's
could
quite
be.
impossible that there have not been cases of corruption in the United States because there have been.
Yes.
I think it's a residue or the corruption. Like some people some things that we perceive as corruption, maybe in the time of the viceroys and the here in America, would have been like mm, maybe some kind of tribute or um, like some gray areas of the law of the time that allowed people to get some benefits and they stick to or they could be as I was telling Ernest before we started. uh, Spain didn't took his transformation, didn't have his transformation to a democracy all until the empire in the Americas collapsed. So we are they are now they have a solid democracy. I mean, they have of course they have their experience with in dictatorship with the Second Republic and Franco.
And
And
Hmm.
hmm?
if I could interject here for 1 second there, Eduardo.
Yeah,
I feel that really Spain really doesn't have a long history of democracy. I mean, it was inter hit and miss. I mean, in the early 1900s, once the monarchy originally fell and the republic took over. Um, Other before that, I mean, Spain was not like the United Kingdom was and the British Empire. I mean, they were a in a weird sense, they were a constitutional monarchy, and they were for a long time. Now, were they fully as democratic as they are now? Absolutely not. But they still had that limit on the power of the king and queen. Um, and that's something that Spain generally did not have a history of, or even Portugal, too, or even Brazil. I mean, with the Brazilian Empire, I mean, it was not really that democratic a monarchy. It wasn't a constitutional monarchy. Spain experimented with it, but I mean, this was the late 1800s, and then even then, it was still the monarch had power.
yeah.
Um,
So the first republic of on 1870 from 1873 to 1874.
Yeah, I mean, so Spain really it was not the best role model for democratic society because I mean
Exactly.
they've only had long term democracy since Franco died. That
Totally.
Excuse me, and
sure.
I shout out to Lama who must be listening to us. I know she must be taking issue with my earlier statement because she's very serious about her Hispanic pride, and I'm sorry, Lama. Um, how are you? I hope you're listening to us. Don't be mad
Yeah,
at me, please.
oh, our llama is forgiving. She's a just Rena, and el Rena justo. Um, and
Yeah,
we
no,
love her.
and I like the Spanish heritage as well. I have no issue against it. I just mentioned that there is a persistent belief of of a Spanish taint in our culture as Latin America, as Hispanic America.
No, I think there is. I mean, there is this difference in that, and but do we think that, I mean, the need for to root out corruption, that definitely has a plays a factor in the in the struggle for democracy, because I think that corruption um, poisons it, and makes people less, enthusiastic about it. Because I know someone who's from El Salvador, and I worked with him a couple of years ago, and he told me that he grew up in a military dictatorship. And I asked him, I said, I mean, didn't you want to be free? And he just said to me, he goes, no, no, I just wanted to have a stable life. I wanted just to keep my head down. I mean, what's democracy done for me? He said. Um, he said it didn't make my life better. All I did was watch some other fool take my money and waste it. They implemented policies that had no impact on my life. And when the dictatorship was in, all I had to do was keep my mouth shut and keep my head down, and nothing hurt me. As long as I have food and a few dollars, what was the problem? He said, and what benefit did democracy have over that? He's like, nothing. He said, either way, I was never free, you know, and I've grown up in a culture that, we don't have the same emphasis on liberty that, say, Canadians or Americans have. And I think that's a very good representation of, a lot of South Americans. I mean, you don't have that emphasis on what we in Canada and the United States would consider liberty,
That
because
would be right. Because the testimony of that Salvadoran friend of yours sounds a lot like the typical Nicaraguan from back in Somoza's time.
now Eduardo,
Yes.
Mexico has a unique kind of background on democracy, because, I mean, for the longest time, it is technically classified as a democracy, but the power was generally held by the PRI. Um,
Yeah.
Before
Yes.
Eduardo's intervention,
Yes.
um, and to and to complement it, I've been curious about that Mario Vargas Llosa statement about the perfect dictatorship. I think Mexico is a unique case, and I always marvel at the thought of Mexico as a dictatorship because, I mean, the EPN, uh, Peña Nieto,
Yes.
didn't didn't seem like much of a dictator. I mean, he doesn't seem to be a strong figure, which is something that we associate with dictatorships. A strong leader, a strong caudillo. So go on, Eduardo.
Yes, it's and well, see, if you allow me to uh, for to give you the background. Uh, yes, Peña Nieto is not a strong leader, and well, Mexico after the fall of the empire became a republic with a constitution really based on the American one. Of course, they have some issues like like the official the official religion of Mexico will be Catholicism and some things like that. But at the time, it was considered liberal. Let that sink in. So you have a republic from that time, from 1824 all until 1862, with the rise of the Second Empire during the Second French intervention.
Yes.
After that, well, before before the Second French intervention, we had a like an internal struggle between conservatives and liberals, and at some point, each faction had their own government, doing their
Sounds familiar. Excuse me, sounds familiar with Nicaragua. Continue, please.
yeah. Yeah, and well, so at it's they so after the intervention, uh, first try to assemble all the political forces in a single government was tried by Benito Juarez.
Yes.
And he said he was told he died during his tenure as president. After that, some of his right hand, Lerdo de Tejada, assumed the presidency, but was ousted by Porfirio Diaz. And Porfirio Diaz actually managed to get the country in under the government control. He advanced he took us from like almost a medieval society to the modern world. We had better railways than many European countries, electricity and telephone lines. Sometimes, as I tell you, better than in some countries of Europe. But of course, as every transformation of that kind, it left some people behind, and these people, and of course, um, um, and of course they. Sorry, I lost the train of thought. Um, they they revolted against him. They ousted him.
The farmers, right? Led
Yeah,
by Pancho Villa.
Pancho Villa in the north, Emiliano Zapata in the south,
Yes.
and some other political figures and militaries like Álvaro Obregón and Venustiano Carranza. So from 1910 all the way to 1920, it's the period of the revolution. And after that, like it was another transformation period where some military leaders tried to assemble all the political forces, laborers, farmers, military, and many other almost all the people that had political power of some kind, and they formed PRA.
Yes.
After that,
Sorry.
after that, the president in turn designated their successor, and so on, all the way to Carlos Salinas to Bueno, this all came crashing down at the start of the 80s, when the only political party that actually postulated a candidate for the elections of 1976 was the PRA, with José López Portillo.
Mm-hmm.
Great orator, but not so great politician. He presided over a really big crisis here in Mexico. So this guy is well, after that they saw it was time for a change, but still the president still put their successor. They put López Portillo put Miguel de la Madrid, and Miguel de la Madrid Carlos Salinas de Gortari. These guys were this was a from a totally socialist government or quasi-socialist government to a technocratic neoliberal government. It's a big shift, but the seed for what happened in these last elections with AMLO, it came to be from that shift. The son of Lázaro Cárdenas, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, was malcontent with the decision of Carlos Salinas de Gortari as the official candidate. So he ran for the presidency. And it's some stuff about if he did really won or but he surrendered the presidency to Salinas or something. But at this point, it's a useless discussion. So,
sorry.
So at the turn of the century, in the year 2000, the PRA lost the presidency to PAN, a right-wing conservative party. It was the first time the PRA didn't, retain the presidency in like 70 years. So these people will try to do their work, and then came Felipe Calderón also. He was the one who started the war against the drug cartels. Bold move, necessary move, but I think it will be a long wait still. And then Peña Nieto. Peña Nieto came to be president after PRA had another transformation. Like, okay, this is a democratic setting. Now we have to compete. We're going to be a center-left party. Okay, but Peña Nieto he was like a visible head only, because people in the back were the ones controlling him and controlling the government. And of course, many people his administration was ridden with scandals of corruption stuff. And with violence. People is angry, and then this guy AMLO, a disciple from Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, came offered people a way out, saying that, well, I will end the violence and I will end corruption. People took it, and now here we are.
But I mean, is now I'll say this: you kind of mentioned like Porfirio Diaz with a little bit of affection, or maybe I might. So I guess he was more of a technocrat. I believe is how history kind of portrays him, at least in from what I've read. And he what he did was quite beneficial for Mexico. Modernizing the infrastructure and the state, which I guess makes sometimes dictatorships to be a positive force. Now, the closest thing we've had in Canada to something like the PRI is the Liberal Party of Canada. They've actually out of the last 100 years, they've been in power for a combined time. I think it was like 69 years in power. Now it's a little bit more, and so much so that they've been actually called the Natural Governing Party. That's a nickname. We also call them the Grits. I don't know why, because they're not very gritty. They're flaky more than anything. But that's neither here nor there. But that's really the closest thing we have to a long-term government, because we don't really have these polarizing these figures. We've had Pierre Trudeau, we've had um, John Diefenbaker, who was conservative. We've had Stephen Harper. These are kind of our versions of strong men, but they always do cede power at the end of the day. People like Porfirio Diaz and who else here? Benito Juarez. They tend not to. And right quick actually. Which I mean, this is the difference, I guess, between our respective regions, because our politicians tend to let go, where a lot of politicians in the Americas have, this need to retain power. Now, usually it's for personal profit. I mean, in the case of Fujimori and in even Nicolas Maduro, because I'm pretty sure Nicolas Maduro is stealing.
Of
There's no,
course.
I mean, there's no way that you can go to Turkey, order a steak from probably the most expensive steakhouse in Istanbul, and then smoke a cigar from a box that has your name engraved in gold on it. So the corruption, it seems to be, no matter who gets in, democratically or otherwise, they're always holding power. Now, I'll ask you this, Eduardo.
Yes.
The Mexican Revolution, the one in the 1900s, that was when they put in that policy of secularism, right? That's where they took Catholicism out of the Constitution. Um,
No, the Constitution, well, the Catholicism was taken out of the Constitution by 1857, and with all the Reformation laws. Benito Juarez was a big pusher for that movement of, making a civil registry for marriages, births, death certificates, like every every country. The conservatives were against that, and when they brought Maximiliano and he saw the Reformation laws, he said, "Well, that's pretty reasonable. Let's do it." He started publishing the liberal laws. And he was a like, but people, people was at the time, and I still, well, more at the time, was really divided about Maximiliano, because he really wanted to, like, include some marginalized groups. He started publishing the laws of the nation, the law of the land. He started publishing it in indigenous languages. He was the first to do it, and
wow.
set the basis for for a central bank and some other stuff. But yeah, it was, going back to the revolution, it was like a big um, thing in those times, because it's like a more Jacobin turn, because they were really, in the constitution of 1917, that was product of the revolution. It took a tougher stance on of lacism, and, you know a confessional nature of the state. And I mean, it's okay, freedom of belief and all.
Uh,
um
I was just gonna kind of say, do you think that if Maximiliano had more time, he would have evolved into a constitutional monarch? Do you think, or something similar? Um, because he seemed like, from what you said there and from what I've seen, he was incredibly liberal, um, and very inclusive. Do you think that, in time, he would have accepted, say, a style of government similar to what they have in the United Kingdom?
I think he would. I mean, look at the background of Maximiliano. He came from Austria-Hungary,
Hmm.
which the dual monarchy. It was a country where the national anthem was translated to 14 languages, so everybody could sing it. It was a really diverse nation. So I think Maximiliano recognized that, like, this is a Mexico is also a diverse nation. They should, so everybody should feel included and pull together
If
to.
you excuse me, he had the potential to be what they call a despot, like Porfirio Diaz sounds he was. Or do you agree with me?
He had the potential to do what?
To be an illuminated despot.
Enlightened
Mm,
despot.
yeah, I don't think he will be a despot. I mean, Porfirio Diaz definitely was an enlightened despot. He had some legal instruction, and he surrounded himself with really capable people like Jose Yves Limantour, who ran the economy of this country almost entirely by telegraph from France, because he lived most of the time there.
Oh,
But I mean, he had people that actually knew how to deal with the problems. Of course, sometimes you have to break some eggs to make an omelette.
Yes.
yes, but I mean, now I'll say this. Yeah, I'm just trying to think here. What I lost my train of thought. Um, does the corruption, and I mean, we can all agree one thing is for certain. Just as death and taxes are assured here in Canada, corruption is assured in the Americas. We all agree with this. Am I fair in saying so?
Yes.
Yes, totally.
Do you think that the amount of corruption in Latin American society contributes also to the rise of the dictatorships? Like, I mean, does it make people see the faults in democracy and want to find that caudillo who's going
I
to
would
take
think
it?
so. I would think so because, uh, as I mentioned, the enlightened despots. I think people see them sometimes as a necessary evil. I mean, you have one strongman type who who happens to check and balance all of his subordinates and ensures that there is no corruption, that there is no stealing, and who builds and educates the people. I mean, and to ask, so what good does democracy make, and what what benefit do I gain from being, free to publish against, to speak against the dictator, like the Salvadoran guy, the Salvadoran friend you mentioned.
Hmm.
Uh, have been here in Nicaragua, started to question that from the Somoza time. I
Now,
mean, we were the granary of Central America. That was the expression back then. People from Costa Rica used to come here to find jobs, not the other way around as it is today. So, what did we gain from overthrowing Somoza? Not much, really.
but I mean, like, I'll ask this then: is some stealing, like embezzlement by these caudillos, is that really worth, like, the does that really kind of fit in with the benefit? I mean, would you really trade liberty for stability, and 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 someone to be rich off of you? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, would you trade democracy for this a stability, like a constant leadership, but you also know that this guy is stealing? But I mean, is that something you would be fine with?
No, because I mean the idea would be that this strong leader, um, I mean, he could profit from his position, but not at the amount of Ortega, for example, has enriched his entire extended family. And but even if he limited his profit to himself, it's still an issue because I mean, from that point, you might as well have a monarchy, and with a monarchy, who assures you that the leader, the dictator, the king, the so-called king, would be enlightened, wouldn't be a tyrant. Nobody can assure you. So I wouldn't jump to make that trade-off that you speak of.
Now, the other thing I'll say too is a lot. I feel that a lot of these dictators, I mean, and we look at them recently as well, like Maduro and Ortega, and Evo Morales is, I think, he's starting to show signs of this. Um, when he changed the constitution to allow him to run for another term or two. This is the start. Chavez and Maduro did the same thing, because they didn't follow their respective term limits. They just changed the constitution to fit their needs. But do you guys feel that a lot of these dictators see themselves as, like the feudal lords almost? And I mean, and in terms of that, like, they feel they can do what they want. The people don't work for the state. The people of the country work for their benefit. Is that, would I be right in saying that?
Definitely. I mean, I don't think these guys, these Bolivarian socialist leaders, these Castro acolytes, they have no delusions of about what they are. They see themselves as their respective countries' landlords and nothing else. Of course, they speak to the lowest common denominator. They speak to the poor. They enshrine the poor and poverty, but and they start to uh, give away free stuff, but they see themselves as what they are as the landlords, nothing else.
And and what do you think, Eduardo?
Um, can you repeat the question? I was like,
Oh yeah,
lost.
you're stuck in the chat.
Yeah.
What I was trying to say is that a lot of these, like, leaders, especially nowadays, like Maduro and Ortega, they see themselves as a kind of more of a feudal leader, like a feudal lord, overseeing, the population, where the people work to profit him, the leader, instead of the nation. Would that be an accurate description?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's sometimes people yeah, but well, in they are like a consequence of some other decision that of people made years ago. Ortega and well, not Maduro, but yes, Chavez. They got to power democratically, right? Well,
Yes.
Ortega did won an election to get where he is now.
If I may have a word here,
Yeah.
he won it with a whopping 38%. I mean, in most countries, that that percentage would require a runoff, what they say
Yep.
a second vuelta,
Yeah.
but not here. They changed the laws to lower the winning percentage from 45% to 35%. How did he do it? By aligning himself with the right wing party, the so called right wing party leader, some Arnoldo Alemán, uh, to get the majority in the parliament and change that law, the electoral law. And so here we are. But he never should have reached power, really.
Well, that's a thing that in Latin American the governments are really really trigger happy on bending the law to.
The
Uh,
constitution that is like the nucleus
of
of
course,
the law,
yes,
not even just any law.
the
I
supreme
mean,
law of the land.
yes, you see how they make all the big fuss in the United States about the Constitution, how they hold it sacred. I mean, yeah, I would like that for our countries.
Yeah, a constitution more than a law should be like in the United States a declaration of intentions. It's what I think. An almost sacred document that gives the general lines for a country. But in Latin America, and I'm talking from the experience of Mexico, constitutions are treated like any other law. The last two presidents amended the constitution, each one more than 100 times. Here,
Ooh.
just here.
Mhm.
Here, it's really difficult to amend the Constitution in Canada. If you even say, for example, changing freedom, because here we don't have freedom of speech, we have freedom of expression. To even change that, it requires the consent of, if I'm not mistaken, the majority of the, actually, I think it requires all the provinces to consent, and it has to have a certain vote of the public. Um, and I've been told by politicians that that kind of change, even like the change to freedom of speech, to have it as the American style, which I personally would love, because freedom of speech is the most important thing in any free and fair society. Um, I They said it's too much trouble, and some people would not vote for it, which surprised me. Um, but actually, even changing our electoral system requires constitutional change. It's crazy. But I'm sorry.
And
Um, yeah.
I want to say that the process to amend the constitution here is basically the same from the United States. Qualified majorities in both houses of Congress and a majority of the local congresses that to vote for those amendments, and it happened every single time.
But corruption definitely plays a part in that. I imagine. It always comes down to political favors or bribery.
Of course, it's well, that's another thing. Uh, uh, the United Mexico is supposedly is a federal country, but it doesn't have a federal tradition as the United States. People in the United States are really jealous mm, of the responsibilities of the state governments. And when the federal government tries to, you know, get to take away some uh, jurisdiction from the or some responsibility from the state governments, people really rise up against it, and that's good. And well, Mexico, for its size, it should be a federal country. For its history, it should be a central country, if you ask me.
Hmm.
Hmm. That's very interesting. And now one positive place in South America that I will say, one beacon of hope. And some people might be surprised at this, but I think the freest country in South America is Uruguay. Um, I think it's probably the least likely country to once again embrace a Cadillo anytime soon. Um, and it even had, I mean, now mind you, it did elect Jose or elect I think was it Jose Majica.
Yeah.
Majica, that was his name. Now I'm not a big fan of Majica, but I'll say this in terms of his personality and the way he behaved, he surprises me because he's one of the few presidents of a South American country that I know of. I should say, now I could be wrong, but he didn't do a whole lot of stealing, and that's you know
Just you wait. As
I know.
when his opposite party achieves power there in Uruguay, they are going to open the Pandora's box on what Odebrecht did there in Uruguay, and it will be all over Mujicas.
And you really think?
I don't really think I'm really sure about it.
Well, I'll say this: Odebrecht has a very positive. I mean, despite how horrible it was, I mean, the whole scandal. Um, I think it is a cleansing flame, as it were, or it has the potential to be a cleansing flame in South America. Now, it'll also contribute to the rise of Jair Bolsonaro, who I honestly am going to make a prediction. Either him or his vice president are going to overthrow democracy. I think we're going to see an auto golpe in Brazil, especially if the issues in Rio continue. Because right now, I believe they have martial law in Rio de Janeiro.
I don't
Um,
I don't think he would, but okay.
well, I mean, he does have the hallmarks. I mean, he speaks favorably of the military government. He has significant contacts in it. I mean, his vice president is a former general who constantly has said, "If I could, I'd overthrow the government to get things done." Now I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm really hoping I'm wrong, but I there's something about Bolsonaro and his vice president that they do make me a bit uncomfortable. Now, would I want Haddad to win? No, no, I don't need Lula's puppet in charge, but I just can't help but feel very uneasy about it. Um,
It's well, if you ask me, the parallels of Bolsonaro and or López Obrador are really interesting. A, a populist candidate which promises to tackle violence and corruption, both in opposite ways. One and one going head on against those problems, the other, you know, being like a messianic way to deal with those problems. But Brazil and Mexico have those things in common. Uh, Big problems with violence, big problems with corruption.
mhm.
So, for example, here in Mexico, I don't know what will happen if after AMLO finish his tenure as president.
If he
Y-
finishes,
Yeah,
if he doesn't extend it ad infinitum.
yeah. If he becomes the Senate, so it, if he actually, doesn't re-elect and leave the country as it is, I'm mm, I'm I'm fearing some guy like Bolsonaro rises up. I mean, it won't be a military. Here, the military after PRA took power, and I have to recognize them for that, is that they dedicated themselves to their things. They didn't. They decided not to intervene in politics anymore. I mean, they have the prerogatives to designate the Secretary of the Navy, Secretary, and the Secretary of Defense, and that's all. They just tell the
which
president.
is oh sorry.
They just tell the president, this guy will be, this admiral will be your Secretary of the Navy, and this general will be your Secretary of Defense.
Which I mean is very surprising. And admirable actually, and that gives me some hope for Mexico, because slowly but surely the system changes itself, and they instill this how do I say this culture, as in, we're not going to intervene, we're not going to hold power behind the scenes. We are Our duties are to defend the nation and from internal and external threats. That's all we're going to do. We're not here to govern the nation, and we're not here to tell them how to govern. We're just following orders. Now, do I think that they would contribute to a dictatorship? I it's hard to say yet. But I mean, like, you got to admit, it's a positive step for the beginning. Because it does follow the American tradition. The American army has never really intervened in American politics, minus the Civil War, but that was a good reason.
Yeah.
But generally, I'm sure you can agree with me that that is a very positive step, that the military has chose to pursue this policy of non-internal intervention.
Yes, it's one of the best things that came from PRA, because I mean, look at Latin America, at the rest of Latin America, the military dictatorship in Brazil, in Chile, in Argentina, in Peru.
Yep.
They all went through some issue like that, and never, or maybe Venezuela too, and Mexico. Yes, we had our own sui generis dictatorship, a perfect one, and nevertheless, the army decided to, we're only going to do our thing. If you don't screw with us, we're going to screw with anyone.
Now, Manuel, is this the same, you think, in Nicaragua? Like, does the army generally stay out of the politics, or are they, an apparatus of the state now in terms of like the repression of people?
Absolutely the second. I mean,
Ah,
the army was the right hand of both dynasties, the Somoza dynasty and the Ortega dynasty. It only changed hands. The current army started as the EPN, and I'm sorry about using Peña Nieto's initials, but it stood as Ejército Popular, no, EPS, excuse me, Ejército Popular Sandinista.
yeesh.
So, and that was back from the 80s. So, it's just been a very smooth transition to a so-called national army, but it's only by name. It's completely uh, party army, and it's a pretty straightforward case. There is no how do you say? There's no nuance here. Uh, it's completely in Ortega's pocket,
Hmm.
as it was in Somoza's pocket back then. I mean, you had the Sandinista guerrilla, Soviet backed, and they overthrew the Somoza government, but they wouldn't have without the popular support. I mean, I think I am sorry that the people of Nicaragua gave it back then. We would be better off with any other people running us.
Mhm.
It Yeah, and I mean that's it's rather tragic that that situation happens and is still ongoing, and that it really defeats the people's trust in democracy. Because I mean, when someone like Ortega takes power through such means, um, it makes people lose that faith in democracy and doesn't allow the trust in it, which is essential to a democracy. You have to trust. You have to trust in the system, or it'll never succeed. Um, I think that that trust is destroyed in a place like Nicaragua,
Absolutely.
and I think that it's going to make that fondness for Cadillos, you know, something very powerful and very nostalgic for a very very long time.
And we are well aware. I mean, some people like me are well aware Gizmo tradition has been a stain on our regional politics. Um, but how do we change that? That is the question. Uh, we we actually crave for someone like Bolsonaro, and that's a whole other issue.
It it is. But I think we've been streaming now for about an hour and a half, 2 hours almost.
2 hours.
Um, yeah, about 2 hours. So I think we can wrap it up. I think that we should come back to this topic in a few months, when Bolsonaro takes power and we see how he develops, when we see see if it affects anything else in the region. I think then we can kind of discuss the democratic situation in the Americas again. It has been an interesting conversation. Um, and I believe I'm going to have a second discussion on this, and hopefully we can get Lama and Caleb, hopefully, and Ozzy won't have the same internet issues that he's had tonight. And he does apologize to everyone for not being able to stay on any longer. So, um, Manuel, I'd love to have you on for the next discussion on this when we get like Lama and Caleb online as well, if you're interested.
Of course, I'm interested.
Okay,
Count me in. Yeah.
thank you, and Eduardo, man, it's always fun doing this with you. I'm so glad that you, and Ozzy are a team on this. It's awesome.
Thank you. It is. I think this is a a good thing that we're doing here. Discussing these topics, because they are really interesting, and sometimes uh, people of our age don't seem very interested in them.
No, no, I agree.
Um,
It's sorry.
Speaking on the basis of what Ozzy said, the polarization. I mean, we all kind of get polarized sometimes in these discussions. I mean, I always go very strong on lefties, as I call them. But uh, discussions like the one we're having here kind of help me balance myself a bit. I mean,
Oh,
I see it from all sides, from all perspectives, and that's a good thing.
I have to say this really quickly to correct somebody in the chat. Dogram Yama. I can pronounce it. but here where I'm
All
from,
he want.
yeah,
Some
but
little young.
some, but I mean, here we say llama, but everywhere else it is in the proper way is llama, which is also it means so many different things. Funny enough. And really quickly, there's a funny story about there's a place in Peru that I go to a lot called the Plaza San Martin, and in this plaza there is a statue of a woman with a helmet, and on the helmet is a llama. And the reason is because if I'm not mistaken, and I'm still improving my Spanish, I'm not as good as Tyler. Um, I someday I hope, but um,
By the way, hello,
Yama
Tyler.
Yama is also another word for like fire or flame. Um,
Exactly.
so
Yes.
when they were sculpting this statue, they said we want a Yama on the helmet, and this guy misunderstood. So instead of putting a flame, he put a llama. And so the and I'll send you guys a picture in the chat later on, because I did take a picture of this statue when I'm there, because this is my favorite plaza to go to in Lima. So if anyone gets a chance, go to the Plaza San Martin. It's quite lovely. Please avoid it after 8 o'clock at night. There are reasons, socialists and other other things, but you know there is a statue there, and the reason that it has a llama instead of a flame is because the fact that Yama has so many different meanings. No, Yama, go to the plaza when you get the chance. I know you're relatively close to it. Um, Go and look at the statue just below the equestrian of Jose San Martin, and you will see the llama. It is really interesting. Now, if it was modern times, it probably would have had a cell phone on her head, um, because that's why I love Spanish. It's so complicated and fun. But that yes, as Llama says in the chat, te llama la llama in llamas. The burning llama is calling. Um,
Yeah,
so
shout out to the llama from Lima.
Llama, me, or as we call her, the cafecita.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm
but
sorry. Now I'm addressing her. I'm sorry for calling you llama. Next time I'll try to pronounce it as we do in Spanish. So offended.
your the gringofication is complete. But with that, guys, I think we'll call it a night. Manuel, muchas gracias for coming on. It was great having perspective of someone who is
It was my
experienced.
pleasure. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure having you. And Eduardo, man, it's always fun.
As always, a pleasure to be here.
Okay, everyone. On behalf of everyone, buenas noches. Have a good
And
one.
well,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
if you're interested in following what we do here, be sure to subscribe to our Twitter, which is QP downscore, no,
Underscore.
underscore podcast on Twitter, and you can follow us also on Discord. We have a nice little group. We share memes, news, and have some discussion and recommendations of books and films. So be sure to join us.
Yeah. And the link to Manuel's Twitter is in the description, as well as the link to our Twitter as well. With that,
Sorry that is unpronounceable.
it's okay. I've seen worse. But with that, everyone, good night, and we'll see you
Good
next
night.
week.